Alright everyone, it's time for a special fifth video because of course just moments ago Trump wrapping up his live announcement that al-Baghdadi has been killed by US forces in Syria. Now, let me weigh in first by saying I am always skeptical of claims made by the US government in part or in parcel without proof. The bigger the claim, the more evidence I want, and the more desperately I want it. I am not going to fully believe this claim because we've mistakenly announced the death of al-Baghdadi before. I believe a Syrian news agency back in 2017, if I remember correctly, some observation group had said that al-Baghdadi had been killed. It was reported widely. I think by the end of the day, we found out that wasn't the case. Now, this has, Trump's own blessing behind it. That's worth a little bit because he's a more transparent president, which is something we haven't had for a while. That being said, when Osama bin Laden was killed, we never got to see his dead, mangled body, despite the fact that thousands of U.S. civilians had lost their lives and tens of thousands been injured as a result directly of Osama bin Laden's own dictates, his own fanatic commands. With al-Baghdadi, it's a little bit more foreign theater as opposed to, the premise being it was an attack on U.S. soil with Osama. With al-Baghdadi, ISIS's operations primarily were linked to the so-called Arab Spring, which was really the rising up of Sharia-loving groups, Islamo-fascists within the Middle East, in places like Egypt and places like Syria, Obama supporting them materially. Unfortunately, what happened is that in the fog of war and the confusion there, ISIS got in, took advantage of the situation, basically was pushing for what groups like the FSA wanted anyway. It's just that they wanted a more organized international version of the same kind of fascism. Anyway, ISIS has been dealt a big blow, if this is true. I want to see, though, a picture of it. Now, Trump's saying that there's literal footage of this entire engagement. U.S. forces went in by helicopter, under the radar with the blessing of the Russians, actually. Took him out, I guess killed his wives, that Baghdadi at the end of he attempted to flee, he couldn't, he got cornered in one of his tunnels actually, and then he detonated a suicide vest, vaporizing himself and his 3 kids, and then he died like a coward, whimpering and screaming. I can actually believe that, but I would like to see evidence that he's actually dead before I accept that version of events. Just out of principle, we have to demand that sort of thing. Now, Trump is more obviously likely to be forthcoming with such a thing because he's big and grandiose and likes to brag. So showing people al-Baghdadi's dead face would be, I think, optically a victory. It would also probably help to stop the promulgation of ISIS, specifically because part of it's been built around the idea that there's this Allah-sanctioned sort of movement. It's protected by divine right, and therefore Baghdadi, the leader, sort of becomes like a god man, sort of like a cult figure. This has happened before, not just among Islamic groups, by the way. The undermining of that central figure can cause the dissolution of such a group, at least in part. Of course, until everyone sees proof that Baghdadi is dead, what likely is going to happen is all those lower-level commanders there, they'll say, oh, no, it's just a lie. It's a ruse to get you to give up, your guns and go back to your civilian life. It's a ruse to destroy us. We keep fighting for our goals. Proof should be forthcoming. It's like when Obama refused to give anyone evidence of the killing of Osama many years ago, and I called it out at the time, and I'm going to call out any similar behavior here. If no proof is offered, you've got a claim, but you don't have any corroboration. When a government makes a claim, it should be able to corroborate it. It doesn't matter if strategically someone comes out and says, well, if we show this picture, it'll cause violence. Yes, like if you're nice to a group like ISIS, or in the past to Al-Qaeda, they suddenly magically become nicer to you as well. That's not the way that fanatic groups actually work. But I would like to believe that this is true. And I do. I think that it's more likely that evidence will be forthcoming. Also, apparently, they grabbed what body parts they could. I'm not sure how they would specifically identify one tattered remain from another if his 3 kids were also killed in the blast. That they were able to field test it, determine it was Baghdadi. I'm assuming we're talking about dental records or something, because I'm assuming that a DNA test can't be done quite that quickly, even under the best sophisticated conditions. Now, when you've got a corpse mangled together with that of several other individuals, it becomes a little bit more difficult, especially when you're in a half-collapsed tunnel, bunker complex of sorts from the blast. Anyway, the idea of the optics win for Trump here, though, is pretty large in two ways. First, saying that he died like a coward, whimpering and trying to flee, that undercuts ISIS, definitely is a good thing. Number two, though, this is one of the keys to the White House. You could argue that the North Korea deal and all of the other things that Trump has been in part or in full successful with in foreign policy hasn't actually notched that win yet. You can't really argue with this, though. This is a major foreign policy success. This is a man who's been big in the headlines on the run for quite some number of years, had never been successfully taken out before. Trump has been using this as an example of specifically his foreign policies geared towards eliminating ISIS, getting the top dog of ISIS after a string of successes in which, they had been 2 years ago constantly conducting attacks. Now they've dwindled away quite a bit. It looks like a big success. Now, of course, if someone has Trump derangement syndrome, they're just going to gobble down the swill offered to them by third parties, which will say, well, it's not really a victory, and here's why. It's funny, because looking at all of the left-wing commentators on Twitter specifically, not a single one is focused on, hey, we got Baghdadi, oh, good day for the world. The leader of one of the most vicious terrorist groups has been reportedly killed. That's great if true. Not a single one of them is remarking on that. The only thing that they could remark on is Trump's speech, in which they mythologically claim that he praised the Russians more than U.S. troops, which isn't true, that he was trying to personally take responsibility for having, in some capacity, I guess, contributed materially to killing Baghdadi, which didn't happen. Then they dug out his tweet on the Osama raid from back when that happened, in which he said correctly at the time that Obama should stop taking credit for it. It was the Navy SEALs that conducted it. Well, Trump is not crediting himself except in the manner of being commander-in-chief in the course of this speech with the death of al-Baghdadi. I mean, he does make the call. The buck stops there as far as anything of a military manner, so that can't really be denied. Again, though, I want to see proof. I want to see a picture at the very least. He's claiming that there's footage of this whole thing. If he actually is, zany enough to release that, then that would be, I think, hilarious. It would also prove his point. It's harder to fake than a photograph, so maybe the certain people on the internet would give him a break. It's funny because a lot of the people who are like, early on they were on the Trump train, but Trump wasn't, actually the racist that the liberals said he was, so they got pissed off about it. They're referring to the fact that CIA created al-Baghdadi. He was reported dead in 2017 already, but that was a third-party group reporting that at the time, and Reuters and some of these other groups jumped on top of it because of the never-ending news cycle. Here we've got Trump in the run-up to this many hours ago now already saying, oh, there's big news, saying that it's actually true. We never got that before, so we've got to keep that in mind. It's a slightly different circumstance. So yeah, it's good if true. Another, religious fanatic is dead, has been splattered because he decided to be cowardly. It would have been arguably better if he had been captured. I guess they managed to kill his wives, but they had suicide vests on. They hadn't detonated them, and so it was difficult to extricate the bodies and, crazy stuff like that. Yeah, interesting day, definitely, to be sure. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but then I'm like, well, this is, at least for U.S. time, it's like, 10 o'clock or something over there. It's still breaking news over there. Not so much here, it's mid-afternoon. I got to keep time zones in mind. It can be a little bit difficult at times. That's about all. Peace out.